Well, Michael worked in Brussels and he obviously knows David Pugh. So they cottoned on to me when I retired and said, "You're going to lead a campaign to keep our services going." But it was very primitive by comparison to now, because of course I knew, yes, I used the internet for research for school, and I'm sure I've made thousands of worksheets for school, but I had nothing like this, like Zoom, Facebook, nada. So very primitive campaign. Um, but I started off by putting out a flyer when I was waiting for Michael to come home from Brussels on a Friday evening and handing out leaflets to people saying, "Do you know they're going to close these stations in Kent?" And most people didn't know.
Yeah.
And it spread a bit from there. I can't remember how I got in touch with various people, but one of them was Olivier Cadic, who used to, I think, do day trips on a Monday, because Michael often saw him going out on a Monday morning on the early train to
Yeah,
Brussels.
and JC has referred to Olivier Cadic as well already,
Yes.
hasn't he? Yeah.
Well, he lived in Kent and I think still does, and produces and translates, the bande dessinée, the cartoon style books. So that his company is doing that. He's also written a book himself in this form, but he is now actually a senator in the French Parliament. And he is the senator who represents French people living out with France. But I think perhaps he might be someone who might have some inner knowledge from the inner sanctums of the government as to what their attitude would be, not just simply Eurostar's attitude. We both went to visit members of KCC and said, "Look, can you help? And can you get lots of people that you know to write a letter, a combined letter to the newspaper to say this is happening and we don't believe it should be." But that's about as far as it went, I think, to contact business people. I did meet some others. One, I think, if I remember rightly, was someone who worked for Gusborne, the vineyard near Appledore, and they were wanting to produce champagne type of wine, and therefore were traveling out to Lille and then to Champagne to speak to people there to give them advice, and wanted to bring them over. And of course that was completely messed up because this was a day trip gone. So there was great support from that, because Michael's work gave him contacts within the Parliament in Brussels. I then got hold of all our MEPs and they were helpful. I think Caroline Lucas, for example, managed to get a vast number of signatures for me. I did say to our council in Ashford, because the leader of the council and the gentleman in charge, I can't always remember my words these days. Anyhow, they were supportive, and I said, "Well, you could pass a petition round your staff." So I think they did.
And of course, all of this political pressure was far more effective in those days because at that stage, the UK government had a financial stake in Eurostar.
Well, Michael travelled back and forward. He came back one weekend and I went out the other because the 90-day rule applied. But our MEPs had to go back and forward as well. And there were quite a few of them. The other thing I did was I used to travel out on a lunchtime train to Brussels on a Friday. So I had a little slip of paper and teacherish pens, in case people didn't have one, to get people to fill out, "What do you think about this closing?" And I actually had people from Ebbsfleet saying, "Well, we don't want Eurostars in Ebbsfleet rather than Ashford, because it's too busy up there and the roads already." I thought that was an interesting one. But I faithfully went round and I did get a lot of people saying, "Well, we can't have this happening. We like going out in our train to Brussels at lunchtime and having the weekend there. It's a wonderful place. And I was shut down because obviously I inadvertently didn't know, gave one to someone who worked for Eurostar, one of the high Hegians, I think. And he said, "You're not allowed to do this. This is our property."
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, it was successful, and I have memories of you actually delivering a big petition to 10 Downing Street, and
Yes,
that highlights really the difference that we are now in, that different political landscape,
yes.
because the ownership is just not there, is it?
Well,
Mm.
the MEPs were behind me or with me. I think Olivia Cadic was there and one or two other gentlemen whose names I have forgotten. And the Prime Minister at the time was Gordon Brown, who was the year below me at school. Um, so I quoted the school motto, Quid Quanabor, where I wish I should strive to my utmost. But then our daughter, who had done work experience in the Cabinet Office, came home and said, "Mummy, you know what happens to petitions, don't you? They all get stuck in the basement."
Well, it did have an effect, Edith. It's lovely hearing a little bit about your experiences, and it was effective, and it did result in that service from Ashford being retained and also expanded. That's the significant thing. And we certainly do remember being able to use the expanded services going to the south of France. But part of the conversation with both of you, Edith and Michael, you're a very interesting couple, because not only was Edith the leading campaign light in 2008, but Michael, you've had years and years of experience within the rail industry. And I know various other speakers in today's call have alluded to the potential of new entrants into the marketplace. And in a previous conversation in the run-up, in the preparation for this webinar, I was very excited to hear you were you were quite upbeat about the prospect of new entrants into the market. And maybe you should also describe a little bit about your background and first, in the, your rail experience, I should say, as well.
Well, I suppose the easiest thing to say is I worked 40 years for the railways, nationalised, privatised, and then went bankrupt with failed track. So anyway, lots of things on there. But in my past, I was the area manager at Ashford when Ashford International was being built, the tunnel was being built, and my role was to make sure they happened. And if you go back in the documents for operating trains through the tunnel, you'll see my signature on some of them. So I have a good understanding of what happens in the tunnel, what happens with international business. And in my latter years, I worked in Brussels as the head of European Affairs for Network Rail, and then as a Secretary General for the European Rail Infrastructure Manager. So I know the key players in Europe. I know how they think, how they're structured, and how much pressure you can apply to them through government, and how much you can apply subtly through other means. But trying to focus on some of the things that have been said tonight and move forward, it is true. I mean, when High Speed 1 was built, there are 4 train paths per hour to the tunnel for international services. And the plan was the first of those 4 trains stopped at Ashford and was overtaken by the second. And if need be, the third, then the fourth. So they're all presented at the right time, the same time at the tunnel entrance. In terms of competition, it's worth thinking and remembering that actually the only private high-speed rail competition, as opposed to national operator versus national operator, exists in Italy and Spain. They are the only 2 countries. France has competition, but it's between Deutsche Bahn, SNCF, FS, SNCF, not private. Therefore, there are different drivers to what they do and don't do. And I mention that because SNCF, whilst not wanting to do a lot with Eurostar, is very, very keen to compete in the Spanish market and is going hell for leather with that. And whenever you put to them the fact that hang on, you say you haven't any money to do things in the UK with Eurostar. Why are you doing all this in Spain? They sort of shrug their shoulders and you don't get an answer. But if you go in the psyche of SNCF, London is just a branch of the TGV North. Just a branch, not important. And we have to get that message over that actually London is still very important to you. I was interested in thinking about new operators, and there are new private operators coming along in France, and one of whom is quite intriguing. It's called Kevin Speed. And he has latched on to TGV Haute Picardy, doesn't have any TGV services, a bit like Ashford for that matter. So he is going to start operating an open access service from Paris, calling it Haute Picardy and Lille. He's ordered his trains and they will be running in 2026. He's also running another couple of services in France, but that's quite separate. If anybody else wants to run any trains through the tunnel, unless they can find any Siemens E320 or old Eurostar services, you are talking about probably 2026, 2027, 2028 before you get the trains built, certified and operating. So there's a gap going to come in there unless you can find some surplus Eurostar style trains or some of the really old Eurostar trains which tend to be cut up. The other new trains which are being built in now for coming into service in 2026, 27 is for another new company called Le Train, which will operate from Bordeaux into Paris as an open access operator in competition to SNCF. So those are things that are happening in France with open access. It was alluded to that there are other operators, Evelyn, perhaps Virgin, Euro, Renfe, who might want to come into the UK. And my guess is 2026, 2027. But the interesting bit, which has gone quiet at the moment, was actually Eurotunnel buying and leasing rolling stock to another operator. Now, this doesn't happen for long distance stock at the moment, but the EIB, in terms of the German model, invests in the regions to buy local trains, which they then lease back to whoever operates them. So that is perhaps the route that Eurotunnel is looking to go for a new high-speed rail operator. If they pick an operator who currently has a safety case, so Renfe would fit that, they would have the train supplied, it makes it much easier to get into the operation of trains. The other question I have, which is a slightly technical legal question, and I'm trying to get an answer to it. To the best of my knowledge, we have never closed an international station in the UK. If you want to close a domestic station or a piece of railway over which domestic passenger trains run, you have to go through a closure process. To the best of my knowledge, that hasn't happened for Ashford or Ebbsfleet, and neither has the spurs that were re-signalled got any passenger services on there. So there is a question mark as to whether there is a legal requirement to run trains over that bit of railway, carrying passengers and stopping at Ashford. And I haven't got an answer to that question as yet.
No,
I would.
no. It's well, they're very, very important, relevant questions, and I mean, just a quick response. Rail professionals that I've spoken to, other rail professionals, tell me, I mean, that was a huge missed opportunity when the documents were prepared when HS1 was leased and sold. They forgot about it, including that requirement, imposing that requirement on operators. So yeah. We will see. I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think but they're very important questions to persevere with.
And one last point, which is...
Oh, sorry, go on, Michael.
It's only a very quick last point. We talked about the new EAS coming in the end of the year, and we talked about Ashford having capacity. What I'm not sure is, my understanding is the PAF in France would probably play ball and get on with it. But I think we are suffering chronically from a shortage of UK border staff. Now, obviously, from listening to Damien, something's been done at Dover for both French and UK border staff. I don't detect there's anybody doing anything about thinking about recruiting UK border staff for Ebbsfleet and Ashford and Stratford if that comes to pass. So I think we need to think how we can get into lobbying that part and not just the rail part. Thank you.
That is, yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over back to Dickon and Bushra.
Well, thank you very much, both to you, Edith, and you, Michael. That's absolutely fascinating and very, very useful information. We're going to move into a question and answer session now. So I'm sure there will be questions that will probably come your way, and certainly other questions.
Yeah, I can start off with the first question. So we've had a question from the audience. Why are Eurostar reps not here? So I guess the response to that is that, you know, we do have our speakers, Andrew and Damon Green, who are working closely with central government, who are our representatives for Eurostar. And they came and attended one of the joint transportation meetings as well, which we attended, and presented our petition to them. So yeah, they are very, very aware of our campaign. And we will make the video available to them should they wish to get a feel for, you know, what this meeting was about. So yeah, we direct those conversations via Ashford Borough Council, KCC, and then Damien Green.
I think I've got a question I'd like to address to Michael Robson, really about enablers. What, in terms of getting services back to Ashford, what do you think are the biggest sort of levers we might be able to pull at the moment, or what do you think are the sort of enablers of that actually happening? So it's a sort of reverse question to what are the major blocks, but what are the sort of key enablers do you think that could help that to happen?
I think raising the profile of Ashford with potential new operators is key to that. But what has Ashford, and not just Ashford, but the region, got to offer to a new operator? What sort of catchment area are they going to get into? They're probably not going to want your Ryanair customer only. They'll want some of them, but they will want some people who will pay a little bit more to travel. So thinking, what would a new operator see as their market for coming into Ashford? And I mean, my understanding is, for instance, that Canterbury University no longer has a link in Brussels. Now, that was a good source of business to Eurostar at that point. And there are other organisations who I think have stopped, probably, as JC was saying at the start, using Eurostar to do those things. So being able to quantify the people who would come back because Ashford was here will help a business case for whoever the operator comes, whether that's Eurostar or a new operator. And the other thing about Ashford is its strategic location in terms of onward transport links. I mean, going back in time when Eurostar stopped here, people from Brighton would come and use Ashford, and they came across the marsh. Now, that's, I would think, probably an outside operator wouldn't be thinking about that. They would assume people from Brighton would go to London, but they don't. Not everybody wants to go to London. And if you had an operator who was prepared to look at going to places where Eurostar have stopped going to, such as Euro Disney Direct, that is a big market. Now, Ashford was ideally built for that in terms of its space and the lounge, etc., is to be able to sell that to a new operator as a potential part of another overall plan in going to Paris. The downside for that operator, of course, is they would have to provide customs facilities in Marne-la-Vallée and Euro Disney. But I think that is a doable thing. I don't think it's something that's possible to achieve. So I think the unblockers are selling Ashford the different segments of the market, and we've seen the report that's been done there. What would drive people to come here, and spreading the word amongst the new players, most of whom have representatives in Brussels, who are usually quite welcoming of people going and talking to them. I mean, the railways here, not politics, the actual railways who are going to be doing it. I do know that railways have been talking about the safety and interoperability aspects of coming to the UK with the European Railway Agency. So things are going on. It's about keeping the profile up, I think, and selling the positive things that stopping at Ashford or Ebbsfleet can bring.
What do you, Michael Solomon Williams, who I think is now not with us in the meeting, but he mentioned Stratford, which is an interesting prospect. And I know when Stratford first came online, there was a lot of excitement in East London about the possibilities that would have for boosting the economy, and there was a lot of local politicians, I think, involved with it. What are your thoughts around Stratford as part of a mix enabling Ashford and Ebbsfleet to regain international services?
I think Stratford is a good thing to think about. From the best of my recollection, there's an awful lot of work needs to be done at Stratford to enable that to happen, because I don't believe the international facilities were actually put in at Ashford. It was just, at Stratford. It was just left as a big space, which is now filled with offices. I think the thing any operator coming into the UK has to think about is, what does it do with these trains when they get either to St Pancras or to Stratford? Where are they going? Because there's no stabling facilities in Stratford, there's no stabling facilities in St Pancras. There are stabling facilities in Ashford. So an operator running and using Stratford as their London terminus, which I suspect would be cheaper than going into St Pancras, could be a valuable thing. And if it was a Stratford, Ebbsfleet, Ashford service through the tunnel, great. I mean, I was interested in the statistics about the East Coast, because one of the operators on the East Coast is Lumo. And they are a new operator, and they run between Edinburgh and London, stopping at Newcastle, you would expect. But the only other two stops they have are Morpeth and Stevenage, which are not what you would consider huge places. But obviously they did their market research and decided there were good catchment areas there. And that's helped drive the overall number of passengers using train. And the same thing could happen from Stratford, Ebbsfleet and Ashford.
Interested in your perspective on the sort of the intermediate stations in France and how that might relate to Ashford and Ebbsfleet as well. So is there? I think you mentioned that to a certain extent the mindset is the sort of city to city, with certainly with sort of SNCF and some of the major players. But do you think that that's going to help the situation with Ashford and Ebbsfleet in terms of new people coming along, open access providers?
I think that could help. I think it will be very interesting to see how Kevin Speed's service gets on. And because there's no TGV serving Haute Picardy, if he actually develops a market from there, it would be analogous with Ashford or Ebbsfleet. So I think it would be very well worth watching to see what he does there. Yes, definitely.